Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have 3 ISTPs discussing why they're not INTPs. Because a lot of ISTPs I come across talk about how they've mistyped as certain types before in the past, either as INTP and sometimes even INTJ too. So those are the most common mistypes for ISTPs that I see around. And perhaps we will go over some of the differences in this video. Dominic, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Yeah, sure. My name is Dominic. I'm 29 years old. I'm an ISTP. And I guess that's everything you have to know about me.
For sure. And Mara?
Hi, I'm Mara. I'm an ISTP, and I co-author a blog called PracticalTyping.
Mm-hmm. I highly recommend it. If you want to understand the Jungian cognitive functions in its full glory, go visit PracticalTyping. It's one of the best typology websites out there. Just go. Yeah. And Deon?
Hi, yes, ISTP, and as you can see, model building is my main hobby, and I'm in New Zealand.
Excellent. And so, ISTPs, what types have you considered in the past when you were figuring out your type, or you were just going through those type doubting phases that everyone goes through? What is a common type like ISTPs tend to, I don't know, think that they are sometimes?
I guess the most common mistypes for ISTPs are INTJ and INTP. So I, for example, still type as INTJ, I guess because that the NI comes out in the test very much, so that I appear as an NI-DOM. Yeah, and I also considered being an INTP because I noticed that I'm probably an TI-DOM, so that was the most obvious guess from INTJ to INTP, but yeah, I'm sure that both are wrong.
I typed as an INTP. Well, when I was younger, I typed as an ISTP. The older I got, the more I typed as an INTP. And that took a while to kind of figure out what was going on there and which one I actually was. But now if I go up and take the test, I'll probably still get INTP if I'm being unbiased.
Fascinating. Deon?
Yeah, I typed as INTP, and I sort of accepted that simply because I hadn't studied the function stacks yet. Once it was pointed out to me that, you know, go and have a look at the functions and compare with what you do, it was really obvious to me, yep, I'm not INTP. The issue wasn't the TI part, the issue was more the SE. And I mean, my NI was sort of obvious. I just didn't realize that I hadn't thought about how much SE I was doing.
Very interesting. Yeah. So this video tells us all a lesson. If you have your friends take a test and they get INTJ or INTP, reconsider that they could be an ISTP, because that's a very common type that gets that on tests. Tests, they aren't accurate sometimes, like half the time. So if you want to help your friends be more intellectually honest and you see them mistyping themselves, you can help the community by possibly looking at all the types they could be from that. Yeah. And yeah, so Deon, you mentioned SE and how you knew that you used SE, so you couldn't be an INTP. Could you go into that?
Well, obviously the amount of crafting that I was always doing. I mean, my happy place is always sitting with something that I'm building, painting, some form of crafting, versus an INTP that I think is most happy discussing or researching some intellectual topic. But more than that, I'm just very aware of details from the environment, whether it be something that I've left somewhere and now isn't there, or I've left all these parts in exactly that layout on my table, and if I come back and they're not exactly like that, I can see it. So, you know, very aware of details.
Yeah.
I guess that the stereotype you mentioned, that INTPs are more happy taking time with concepts and philosophy, made me think that I'm an INTP, because I take a lot of time to study philosophy in my free time. So that made me think that I'm an intuitive, maybe. Because as you said, SE is so obvious when you have it in the second spot, that you don't even consider that people could have problems with that, you know. And you also the difference between NE and SE is how you perceive the world, and you never get to know how you would perceive the world if you would be an E user. So you don't even know how it would be to be that. Does it make sense? Because you can imagine to make decisions differently, like an FI user, for example. But it is a lot more difficult to imagine how you would perceive the world if you would be an E user.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Mara, you had something you wanted to say?
This is why I can never mute myself, because I never remember that I'm muted. But no, I was saying that the INTP descriptions tend to sound a lot more intellectual than the ISTP descriptions. So it's like there's this automatic bias that if you're smarter, you're gonna be an INTP. And it's easy to make that jump, and that's kind of where I went at a certain point with it too. Is that, well, they sound like they're more analytical and more, you know. And then I think sometimes auxiliary SE isn't as actively observant. Like, I spend a lot of time around SI dominant, and the comparison there is the SI dominant is super observant and remembering everything, and I'm going, why would you remember that? So it's like, so me being around that all the time, I don't feel like my SE is super, I guess, on constantly and active. I'm noticing things as I need to versus like every little thing constantly.
Interesting. And so you guys are so succinct. Yeah. So I was wondering about NE, extroverted intuition in INTPs versus NI, introverted intuition in ISTPs. Where's the difference there? Like, how did you know that you were an ISTP from that? What are the differences between you and INTPs in that respect?
I can't quite imagine, as Dominic was saying, an NE DOM, or even a high NE user. The way my NE comes through, and I've been told that my NE is not bad at all, but from my own point of view, my NE seems like the tool at the bottom of the toolbox almost. I can do it, it's fine, but I don't need to do it that often. So what does it really mean for me to be detecting things? And what does detective mean in that sense of NE? In a sense, slightly like when I'm busy on a project and I need to get relations between things, and it's quite difficult to actually even put that into words. I was watching a video that tried to explain it, and I can see the way the classic detective look would use that. They've got to find answers to things by cross-referencing this clue with that clue, this fact with that fact. Does this lead us somewhere? Does it not lead us somewhere? Does my project have a path down this route? What could I use for that? What could I use in place of this? Versus my NI, which is a deeper understanding of the entire nature of assembling parts, how everything fits, and so on. I'll give you one little example. With my model parts, I can in the beginning I would have I'd be building a model, and I'll take the parts off, and you cross-reference to the instructions, get the numbers, what goes where, because the instructions told you. But the more you build, the less you need instructions, to the point now where you could take all the parts off 10 kits, juggle them all up in one box, and give it to me and say, build them without instructions, and I'd probably be able to do that. So my NI, and I suppose a bit of NE is in there as well, but my NI understands the nature of what makes the whole so well that I could do that. I'll let someone else talk a bit.
The main thing that it came down to for me on NE versus NI was that it just seemed like the NE users would get involved in these different things, research different things for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Like, we're just looking into all these things for fun, just, and we'll jump here, then there, then there, then there, there's no direction and just a scatter plot thing going on. And I can't do that at all. It's like, if I'm looking into something, there is a reason for it. I am looking for something. I am trying to figure something out. I'm trying to learn how to do something that I'm actually going to do and put into action, and not just know for the sake of knowing. And that's what seemed to really come down to in all the research I did on NE versus SE, really, but NE versus NI.
Well, that's actually a good point. The people that mentioned that I have good NE, it was all in response to random sort of meme posting and comments on groups, where the whole point is just making an interesting next relation to something. So it's exactly true what you say. The directed use of NE is, well, the more directed it becomes, the closer it becomes to NI. But I mean, let's say the required or on-demand use of NE, not just for random nonsense, like more a detective who actually is solving a crime, but is trying to find clues and so on. So yeah, you've got these two aspects of NE.
Yeah, a lot of extroverted intuition users I know will just learn for the sake of learning. They kind of have Wikipedia trails, like they call it that sometimes, where like a link leads to a link, that leads to a link, that leads to a link. And they just keep learning without a clear endpoint or use for that knowledge at all. It's just to learn. Yeah.
Okay, but I do that too a lot.
Do you do it more than NI? Or does your link to link to link have a central theme?
Yeah, I guess I also have no reference like how an INTP would do that and how much I do that. I guess if you're for example, philosophy has no direct use or something like that. So that's obvious, just knowing for the sake of knowing. You can't directly apply it to anything. But
I mean, it's not to say ISTP can't be into philosophy. I think that's more of use philosophy as more of a life guidance kind of thing, don't you? Or no?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if it's more TI or NI, but I guess I just want to make sense of the world so that I know in what kind of world I live in. So, and therefore I have to learn a lot of stuff. And if there's something I find important for that picture of the world, I guess I'm acting like an INTP in that point.
Mar, what are your thoughts on that?
On philosophy?
Is that within the realm of ISTP?
I don't like to say that one type cannot be into this thing.
Yeah.
Like I don't like to say that because I like to think that every type can be into one specific thing. They'll just do it in a different way. Because I don't want to fall into that trap of like, if you are into this, you must be X type. I don't think that's true at all.
I guess what makes the difference between an INTP is that things like philosophy or so, I can only do it when in my free time, when there's no stress or something like that. And I also discovered that interest later. So the typical ISTP things like engineering or things like that came earlier to me, and they are easier and without effort. And the intuitive things are a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. What do you mean by more difficult? Can you go into that?
I guess at least when I watch your videos with INTPs and you ask them questions about anything, they just start talking like it was no problem for them, you know, and they can just maneuver around these things very easily, and it's very hard for me to even start talking if I don't have the point in my head already.
Yeah, that is
The thing though, because of the way any users like to kind of get this scatter plot of information, that's why they can just usually come out with something. Whereas like you're into philosophy, you can be interested in a subject that technically has no purpose, but you're not necessarily going into all these other random subjects that have no purpose. You just happen to have this interest right here.
Yeah, and I also would find it distracting if I don't see that this is, or if a topic isn't leading to the point I want to get, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That might be a good point there, as to maybe why NE for an ISTP might just be dragged into NI form. I mean, that should be sort of self-evident that NI is higher anyway. But what I mean by that is if you're getting relating ideas, you probably have 10 higher themes already waiting, so you're just going to automatically slot things in rather than have them remain disjunct, so to speak. So that NE of just random, it's not truly random, but just grabbing relations on as required, like let's say just browsing odd topics from link to link to link, probably just gets hijacked immediately by the NI process that you're actually wanting these things to belong to something.
Yeah, extroverted intuition has a random access quality to it. So with INTPs, you'll notice that they can quickly answer any single thing you ask them with ease. So the extroverted intuition causes a verbosity. It causes them to be verbose. So it's very easy for them to articulate what they have to say. And it's very easy for them to pick an idea and to just talk about it. Whereas for ISTPs might have a little bit of a harder time putting their thoughts into words because they want to kind of get their point first before speaking, which is a little different than the INTPs who are more scatterplot, like Mara said.
I guess
ISTPs tend to be vaguer in many ways. They may be very specific when they say something, but what they say overall tends to be vaguer, whereas the INTPs will go into all these little specifics, give you all these extra little details.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess you could spot INTPs and ISTPs if you would do a brainstorming session, for example. So if there's a topic or you want to brainstorm about, in the one case, I would have the conclusion ready, and I won't need the brainstorming to come to a point, and I would find the brainstorming session unnecessary or distracting, or I haven't thought about the subject already, and then I'm totally empty and won't have anything to contribute to the brainstorming. But probably a day later or so, I would have something ready in my head that I could contribute, but then it's too late.
Yeah, brainstorming is a huge way you can tell apart NI versus NE. INTPs, they have extroverted intuition. It's a function that's generally very good with brainstorming and coming up with ideas, a plethora of ideas that are seemingly unrelated, like desperate ideas. They'll have more of an ease with brainstorming and throwing out ideas without attachment to them. Whereas ISTPs, they're not going to be as into brainstorming as INTPs on a whole, because brainstorming doesn't always have like a direction or a point before going down that route, or it's also just hard sometimes. It feels much more rich in my head, like the idea I'm trying to convey, but when I try to say it, like only like 5% goes through, and then I'm only saying 5% of what I actually think. So yeah, great point, Dominic.
Here's another thought that I've been having. I've been trying to relate NE to TE and NI to TI because I understand TI really well and I understand NI somewhat well. And I can observe TE reasonably. So where does that leave us with NE? Or how do those functions relate to each other? Now, for myself, my TI dominates everything. So I'm actually somewhat aware of my NI doing things. Whereas if I speak to NI DOMs, I always sort of have the statement that I know it just because I know it. And NI is just knowing. And to me, NI isn't just knowing. NI knows because you've previously understood the system very, very well. Maybe that's type, people's type, MBTI type. So you could know something about someone because you understand type, or I might know something about the assembly of parts or the nature of 3D objects because I understand the physical world very well. So when I'm using my NI, it's processing a little bit like TI, and if I think of NE, it's accessing facts in somewhat like the ad hoc fashion of TE, if that makes sense. And I'm sort of glad that TI rules my functions because it does make me quite aware of it. It analyzes everything that's been happening. So as I'm getting facts in relation to a project, as I'm NIing a lot of things together, I'm aware that I'm doing so and why I was doing that. If I'm looking through parts in the garage to sort of what could fit for this, what could I use in place of that, and that'll just be the right part right there, whereas someone else would just see it as a part. And you know exactly that was the part that you had in mind for something, even though its actual purpose was something completely different. But that's because you understand the nature of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with you. I guess that NI is what outside of MBTI is called understanding.
Yep, I can go with that. I sometimes have to try and separate what TI really does versus what NI does. And I have to almost remind myself that TI is analyzing and processing everything. Its goal is understanding, but NI aided so much in that understanding process. So NI alone could achieve the understanding. TI just worked it through a machine, continually analyzed every aspect, but the end understanding came from NI.
Well, so NI is a perceiving function. So NI is information. TI is actually processing. And that's where I think people mix the two together. NI is not forming a judgment. NI is purely gathering information and internalizing it. And then TI is taking it and processing it and coming to some kind of judgment on it, because that is a judgment function. And that's where people mix them up. So your INTJs, they're pulling in a lot of information with their dominant function. They're doing the I just know, because the higher you get NI up, the more abstract you get, and the less you really remember where it came from, because you're not really concerned with those physical aspects. Just let me bring in my vague abstract information. Whereas I think if you get the NI a little lower, you might be more likely to have a concrete way to trace back sometimes, because it's not quite as high and you're more valuing the SE.
Cool. How does NI show up in the third slot for ISTPs? How would you describe the function that people consider the biggest function?
The one aspect that I just saw recently, which I wasn't that aware of, was how my SE, or maybe TI-SE, overrides NI. So if I'm shown something, the immediate response is the literal view of what I'm seeing. The SE world is relating it or interpreting it as strong as possibly to what is known, what is the real world. Whereas if the picture looks like something else and has a hidden image in it, so to speak, the NI has to work a little bit harder to feed that through the SE level to be seen. Whereas an NI DOM immediately sees the sort of hidden things. They're just relating everything. So yes, my NI has to be called upon somewhat strongly, a little tug on the leash, so to speak.
Yeah, and so like I tend to get a lot of I think tertiary intuitives tend to feel pretty abstract because they're hyper conscious of that third slot. And I know I will get my different, I guess, hunches and ideas of where something's going to go or whatever it may be. But since it is lower, I'm not necessarily going to really trust that. And more often than not, it's like I'll see something happen and go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it makes sense that happened. I kind of, yeah, okay, that's about what I thought. But I'm not really going to sit here before it happens and go, yeah, this is definitely going to happen. I just know it.
Yeah, that's cool.
I've got another little example, which might give you an idea of how the NI plays out in my thing. So this one model aeroplane project, a bigger one, and I needed to make 2 fiberglass wingtips for it, which I quite enjoy the challenge of a new thing, a new crafting area. So learning the fiberglassing and that. So I sculpted the original balsa wooden wingtip, and then I needed to make the mold and then make the first fiberglass wingtip. So this is what we're talking about. Okay, so I make the first one. It's not the best, as one would expect. It was certainly usable. It's okay. Okay, let's see how we can work this to the second one. What improvements do we make on the second one? Make the second one. And so it started going. Oh, I'm not entirely happy with that third one. Oh, that third one's a bit too this, a bit too that. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. In the end, I'd made 18 of these, all with variations and all different. Some lighter, some heavier, some this and some that. Most of them good enough to use. So my NI is just continually trying to understand this process better and better so that I can understand the entire nature of making the part. So I've almost lost track of the fact that I only need 2, and I don't care that I only need 2. Now the issue is about learning fiberglassing well enough, or very well, I should say.
Yeah,
Refine.
true.
The NI just wants to continue until it completely has absorbed this process.
Interesting. And so, Dominic, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So NI is seeing patterns in things, and if you apply that to philosophy, for example, and maybe you're reading about a philosophical system, and you're trying to analyze it, then you could do it in 2 ways. You could look for logical inconsistencies, which is pretty easy for me because I'm a TI DOM, and that's the typical stereotype. But a system doesn't have to be logically inconsistent to be untrue, because something can just be a bad representation of reality. And these kind of considerations take quite long, and I don't have conscious control over the kinds of information or ideas I have about something like that. It just comes into my mind maybe in the morning when I woke up. My head is quite busy and I get all these ideas, but yeah, it just comes suddenly, and yeah, it's not as accessible like an INTP could use his intuition, I guess.
You're seeing this theme with ISTPs taking a while to access what they actually want to say. So they'll say it, but they'll say it in a vaguer way than the INTPs will. And the INTPs, like what Mara said, they'll be more specific, and they'll have also an easier time voicing their general thoughts on a lot of things. It's just the thoughts come way more easily for them, and they're more verbose.
But I think there are 2 parts. You have SE, and you observe the world pretty well, all the details and variations. And the next process is to gain all the patterns and assign meaning to it. So you have your opinion about it, like a worldview, for example. So that's the first part. And the second part is to express that with words. And, that's the second very, very difficult, or yeah, it's not easy, and it takes some time, and sometimes you get ideas by doing something totally different, like taking a walk or something like that, or go sleeping, and then suddenly the right idea comes into your head.
A speculation. With NI, it's kind of like waiting for that idea to emerge in the back burner. So like as you're taking a nap or you're walking, you're waiting for that idea to come. You're not actively hunting for it. So with extroverted intuition, NE, it's known for hunting for ideas. So NE will just actively brainstorm to engage with patterns, whereas NI will kind of wait for that pattern clarity to come to them eventually, when it all clicks, when it all, like all the things come together where they can get the best read of that situation. I don't know if that thought came out as eloquently as I wanted it to, but
So I tend to have this issue, I know, where I'm like looking for something, mentally speaking. I'm looking for something, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm looking for because something doesn't quite make sense. Like I tend to not necessarily know what part is TI and what part is index. I think both are playing into it. But I'm sitting here going, okay, I'm missing something. I know what I'm missing, and I'm trying to just think, but the thinking isn't really in words, and I'm just like waiting for something just to click in there. Like no, I'll get it in a second. And what I'm missing, I'll know what it is in just a second, or I'll figure out the question that I need to ask any second now. And until then, I'm going to ask these other questions that will probably not get me my answer. But maybe if the person's a little bit more verbose than me, they'll start saying things that might give me what I need. And it is the most frustrating thing ever. And I think it's a combo of the two somehow, some way, because it's just so, I don't know, feels so much like flailing, but mentally.
Mental flailing. That's a good term to coin. I can relate to that on some level. Yeah. Another difference between INTPs and ISTPs that appeared in this panel too, and I totally forgot my point. When I lost that point, I don't have like a backup NE point that I could like just replace that with and talk about that instead. I'm just like, huh. And then it just goes silent. Yeah, great. Thank you, brain. You were so useful. It'll come back maybe later. So why do you ISTPs think there's that trouble with vagueness of your thoughts? Why does that phenomenon happen?
I read somewhere they were saying that people with SI tend to think more in words versus NI users do not think in words. We think more in pictures or something. I don't really remember exactly, but I was kind of went, okay, I could kind of see that. Because I don't necessarily think in words.
Uh-huh.
Don't necessarily agree that our explanations are vague, but I would say that they may come across as vague to the receiver. I suppose sometimes when explaining, we sort of we need to explain this little thing here. So we're starting here and we're making sure that you understand all these things that are required to before we can get there. So we're going around and we're ensuring that you're with us. Are you with us? And then we can maybe get there. And if you've lost us, we need to go fetch you out somewhere there.
Yeah.
And so that might be, that might be part of it. I mean, we could explain. I can often explain something straight to the point, but I know that I'm not explaining the full understanding of it to the person. So they might just say, "Oh yeah," and it's an empty because I haven't given them the entire process.
Well, it depends on context, right? Like,
yeah.
Depending on who I'm talking to, I'm going to sit here and try to break it down for you, and then I might get a little bit more specific. But like we had on one of the panels before with ISTPs, and the question was like, "How would you spend your free time?" And it was kind of like, "Well, doing whatever I felt like doing." And Joyce was like, "This is a very not useful answer." Like very unspecific, like whatever you feel like doing. Okay, well, what would you feel like doing? Usually.
I wanted to add that it also depends whether you are writing or talking, because I think, at least for me, writing is 100 times easier because there's no immediate pressure to say something. You can.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it takes two days to write a letter of 2 sentences, because you can take all the time you need for it.
Yeah, true.
I guess that's what we talked about with NI is not accessible very easy, and it just comes at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like when I write an article, I do exactly what Deon was saying, where it's like, now, okay, let me start at this bottom part right here. Now let me build this onto it and this onto it. And I got to explain this to explain this to explain this to explain this. And eventually I'm going to reach this thing up here that I wanted to talk about and was the whole point of this article. But first I got to tell you these 10 things because they're all groundwork for this one thing up here.
Yeah, when I, for example, when I write something, I will read it at least 50 times to make sure that everyone would understand it the same way as I understand it, because words are just the shell for the meaning. And different people could eventually understand the words differently. So, and if you're doing that immediately while you're talking, that makes it really difficult to articulate your ideas, because you always stop to check if what you're saying is what you mean, you know?
Yeah, so I think TI organizes thoughts. So I think a lot of times because of that, writing is a lot easier. It's a lot easier for me to sit down and try to structure my thoughts and figure out how to actually lay this out. Versus my comparison is Ryan, the ISTJ, with the complete opposite stack, but in a similar order. He's much better at explaining verbally. Like he could just sit there and just produce the information and explain it to you. But for him to sit down and write an article is a lot more complicated for him. And actually sit there and figure out how to organize an article. Like I would think that would be easy. I would think, oh, TE is the organization function. You can't organize an article. But he has the hardest time, for whatever the reason, organizing an article. Whereas I'm just like, dude, structure this. Like,
yeah. I wonder if two factors could be playing into that as well. So it's the TE, like you said, Mara, and also the extroverted intuition that Ryan has as well. So with my NE user friends, I tend to, after meeting a lot of people in the tech community, I start to hear the same stories again and again. And one story I hear a lot from extroverted intuition users is like, oh, when I was back in university, my problem with essays was I wrote way over the word limit. It was a lot of effort for me to be able to shrink it to the required word limit. What I'm trying to demonstrate with that is with extroverted intuition, it's kind of good with the like the kind of word vomit or the word generation, but it's not always good with succinctly knowing which points are the most relevant for the essay and to make it the length that it's supposed to be without going over.
This might sound terrible, but sometimes I can tell I'm dealing with an NESI person or SINE person if I ask them a question and then I feel myself just kind of glazing over as I'm getting too much information. It's like, no. Answer just the question. Because if you give me way more than the question, I am not going to remember anything that you said or the answer to the question. So just stop and give me just the answer.
I've had that in meetings where I've been asked for an estimate of something or other. And again, this is them asking me for that. I can give them a straight answer, but a straight answer is meaningless in this context because I need to ask them, yeah, but do you mean you want to include this, this, and this as well for your estimate? Look, just give us the estimate. Can't we get a straight answer out of you? And I'm like, I am giving you the best straight answer because any single value is a wrong answer. Do you want this? Do you want to do it the fast way? Do you want to do it the more detailed way, et cetera, because they're different estimates for each one. No, just what's the estimate?
Well, that's a need for accuracy. Yeah, you just can't. If there's other factors, we got to clear up these factors before we can give an answer. Otherwise, it's not going to be an accurate answer.
That is true. The need for accuracy. Yeah.
But I mean, going back to the point, I don't think ISTPs are vague on their intent or ability to answer. It's just you need to understand what the ISTP is trying to convey. A little bit of the structure, a little bit of the understanding, and then you can get the facts so that the facts really fit into the right slot at the time.
It's a matter of perspective of who you're talking to, as in who's hearing it.
Yeah. Depends on how you're using the word facts and vague, because both ways of seeing it are true, and depending on how you frame the word fact,
On the other hand, I may sometimes actually answer vaguely like, do you want burger or pizza? Yes. That's a valid answer for that question. It hasn't told you what I want, but I do want pizza or burger.
Yeah. I find that generally, like, my ISTP friends are what people would consider vague unless they're trying to TI clarify something. So like their TI is trying to clarify a piece of information. I'm like, I should really give an example with this. Otherwise, I'm just saying words. But then I'm like, examples, and then I'm drawing a blank. So
I could give you an example. For example, when people ask me questions that I find silly or unnecessary, or that the answer would lead into a totally wrong direction, then I intentionally give vague answers to bother them, so they notice that the question was silly. I do that quite often.
Also give vague answers if I don't want to answer the question.
Yes.
Yeah, there's this theme, Dominic and Mara were talking about before we started recording, and it was like, what happens like when an ISTP just doesn't want to do something? So basically I was like, ISTPs, it's hard to bring them on panels because they're kind of shy. And then Dominic, he said, maybe it's partly because we're shy, but it's also partly because we don't want to as well. And then and I was like, wow, there's this element of just, is this TI apathy? What is this? Where does this come from, not wanting to do it?
Well,
Is it
there's a desire to be in the spotlight. I think that's a thing. Like, I'm really not big on the spotlight. I have a hard time coming up with words to say on the spotlight anyway, or in the spotlight, so.
Yeah, being an introvert, being a thinker, just, I don't know, who knows? Yeah, but Mara, you bring up a really good point where you're like, you can tell if someone's an extroverted intuition user by when you're reading what they're saying. They'll type in a certain way. Like, there's a very distinct extroverted intuition typing style. And yeah, it's ultra detailed storytelling, extremely detailed storytelling. And those details aren't exactly relevant for you getting to understand the point more. They're just details for the sake of details. I had an NESI using friend, and they called it their sushi conveyor belt mind. So it's like whenever they see a new dish rotating on the sushi conveyor belt, they're like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to grab that. And I'm like, where's the point? Where's the point? Stop getting these random dishes. Yeah, with ISTPs on a whole, not all. Like I don't want to generalize and make anyone feel left out. On a whole, INTPs use more words when they are conveying a point, whereas ISTPs may use generally a little less words because they'll be able to convey their point a little more succinctly, more clearly, concisely. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you sent me that one any user panel. Was it the INFP one? I don't even remember it. It was like 4 hours long or something ridiculous. Maybe it was 3. I was like, what the heck, man? How can these people talk for this long?
It's quite the miracle. Yeah.
I'll give you something purely anecdotal. I've noticed a lot of any users in my life will send me like 20 texts within this period of like 10 seconds.
Yes.
When I hear my phone go off 20 times in a row, ping, 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 like, hey, probably my sister, or my brother, or maybe this person over here. They're all high end users.
Yeah, when my inbox, like, it goes off mad cow, and it just goes ping, 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 like with an idea. I call it the NE avalanche, the extroverted intuition avalanche. And so what they'll do is they'll send you like a million ideas, and they'll also send you like video clips or esoteric references that they'll have to show you with the ideas. And so it's just a lot of information at once, immediately. Mm-hmm.
Or just like single words. Oh my God. I can stop and combine this into one message. Why was it 2 and then 2 and then 3 words and then another couple words and then oh look, we got a sentence here.
And so any differences you see between your type and possible types you can mistype as?
Something I was wondering, you did an INTP live session. Would something like that even be possible with ISTPs?
It's hard to even get a recording with you guys.
Yeah, but if someone would ask a question, that it would probably take a lot of time until someone finally decides to answer.
Well, the hope is that there's at least one ISTP there Who knows how to answer that question?
The room will just turn into a quick silence until the first ISTP chooses to speak. It'll be the video with the longest pauses at the ISTP live Q&A. Just half of the video is going to be a pause.
I've got a quick question. Tell me what function is most in play here. Person sees something. Let's say something along. You've maybe seen it in movies. That person sees this number. They see this number on, say, a house, a letterbox. Then they see the number on TV. Then they see this here, and they start thinking, "Oh, that number's coming up a lot today." And then they sort of lead themselves to believe that they've seen this number now, 5 times, 10 times today. What does this all mean? What is that?
Sounds enough.
Weirdness.
Well, yeah, but you do that thing where you see the car and then you see the same car, and the only reason you're seeing the same car over and over and over again is because you're for some reason thinking about this car.
Yeah.
It's not really necessarily any kind of coincidence, just you're noticing this one thing right now and you're hyper noticing it.
Yeah, yeah. It's not actual coincidence, and it has no actual meaning. It's
like
just a focus for the moment.
It's a psychological.
Buy the car and see them everywhere suddenly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a psychological bias. When you know it exists, you pay more attention to it, or you notice it everywhere once you notice it. Once you start focusing and paying attention to it, you notice it everywhere. Type of brain bias, cognitive bias. Yeah,
I think the aspect of INTP versus ISTP that still somewhat doesn't settle with me 100% is I tend to strongly relate crafting with ISTP. However, that isn't always true, as in Dominic's case. And Mara, I don't know to what degree you have crafting hobbies or do hand activities where you like, I don't know, painting, building, decorating, whatever.
When I was younger and had a lot more time on my hands, I was more into sports. I'll use this term. I was very much into weapons. So I had a target in my basement. I threw axes, knives, stars, spikes, etc., and I had different things like that. I took karate for a while. I had a lot of physically geared hobbies. I went camping, backpacking a couple times. I didn't specifically get really into crafting that I can think of specifically, but.
So on a daily basis, how much are you SEing?
The thing here is that I think some of that can be anecdotal because SE can outlet in different ways. So, I mean, these days I do a lot more in my blog, and so doesn't seem directly SE, but it kind of depends. Because if you say create a website, I think that could have a lot of SE drivers in it. Because you're creating this thing, I guess we'll use the word aesthetic, even though I hate using aesthetic, it references SE. But you're creating this visual thing, even though it's not a physical thing. And you can do that from an SE standpoint, even though you're not physically making something with your hands. Yeah. And I do some website creation and stuff like that. Okay. I also get into I see that can go into many different things too. The problem is I can see so many different ways to explain one hobby from different functions. Yeah. Because in my brain, it's more about how you approach the hobby versus the hobby itself. Yeah. So I think there's probably a trend for the higher SE users to be more into crafting than the other functions. I think there's probably a trend toward that, but not necessarily the only way SE will ever outlet. Yeah. Which is why a lot of the ISV descriptions are describing basically, I guess, you in many ways with all the crafting. Yeah. They made it easy for me. But I'm just noting the difference between Dominic and myself. My work contains no crafting
so I get no sort of job satisfaction to feed my type, whereas Dominic's does. Electronics and so on is an interesting and somewhat rewarding for the ISTP point of view. My hobbies have to feed that all to me because I don't have that in my work. Just
that makes sense.
So that might also be a reason why Dominic is drawn a little bit more to the intellectual aspect and philosophy in the personal life.
I used to work in systems administration, and I think that was a lot of more SE driven.
What I wanted to add is that philosophy is not my only interest. Obviously, I also like hiking, for example, and that's quite SE heavy, I think.
Yeah.
So
okay. Yeah.
I guess as an IP with the observing functions in the middle, you are quite balanced with intellectual versus SE things.
Mm-hmm.
And I also notice that when I'm reading too much or watching too many of Joyce's videos, I definitely feel the need to go outside and do something physically.
Yeah, I also get that sort of thing.
And when I was a child, I used to play with Lego for years. You could put me in a room, give me something to drink, and then you won't see me for years. And I also had, I don't know what you call it, model railway.
Yeah.
When I was younger. And I would still make that a hobby if my apartment had enough space for that.
That is so amazing.
I once tried to do a Lego thing. This is where sometimes I've had people suggest to me that they have ADHD, and this is where I could potentially see it. I sat down and tried to look at this Lego thing that you're supposed to make. And I just got the worst headache after like 3 minutes. Just tried to concentrate on this stupid Lego model. And I just thought, can't do this. Got up, walked away.
Oh, that's so cute. Dominic, you thought you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I guess at least when I was younger, you buy a model or something like that, and you build it like the manual says. And when you have enough models, you have enough parts, so you can build something on your own. That's the more satisfying part about Lego, actually.
That makes sense.
Yeah, fascinating. And so INTJs, ISTPs mistyping as INTJs. I'm wondering why that happens and where you think the differences are for all of you.
I think SE and TE can be easily mixed up because SE is very action oriented. SE wants to take whatever that's going on in here and do it. Let me do the thing, which is why they're not interested in doing a lot of the theoretics usually, because they're like, just give me my action plan and let's roll with that and stop talking about it. And then TE, similarly, TE is very much about like, let me create structure, let me complete these goals and reach these, achievements. So I think the two can start to look very similar. So if you get a driven STP, they're going to look very much like an NTJ under certain contexts.
I also think that most people in the community take text-based tests, and it's very hard for the people who design the tests to differentiate if someone picks a certain answer because of the intuition or because of the eye, because a lot of questions that are designed to distinguish between S and N satisfy the TI, and so they pick the N question, although they may be sensors.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I feel like NE has, in many ways, stolen tidbits from other functions. And I used to just say it was TI. I used to just say that NE has stolen stuff from TI, and that's why the INTP descriptions can be very relatable sometimes as an ISTP because Annie has taken from TI. But then recently, I got Carl Jung's book because, you keep saying that we're very much in line. I haven't read it. So we actually got it the other day and we're reading some of it. And we were reading what SI is according to Carl Jung. And based on that, Annie has taken some from SI and claimed it as Annie. And I was like, that's very interesting. Annie's taken from TI, Annie has taken from SI. This is why Annie descriptions are so long.
Wow, that is hilarious. That is so funny.
That was a
INTJ.
story.
INTJ is also an easy result for people to get on tests, like to begin with too, because there's an intuitive bias with tests. Like a lot of sensors will score intuitive on the tests because some of the questions are like, do you have an imagination? If yes, intuitive. If you don't have an imagination at all, you're a sensor. And like, no, like these tests are not accurately gauging S or N at all. And a lot of my sensor friends score N on a lot of personality tests. So yeah, that's another thing to look out for. Also, it's really easy to think that your third function is stronger than it is in its third slot. So for the ISTPs and the ISFPs, they can mistype as NI-DOMs, like being NI-DOMs, because they heavily identify with their third slot NI. Personality hacker, what they say is that your auxiliary and your tertiary function, they're your conscious functions. So they're the functions that you can see. And so if the ISTP and the ISFP can like see their NI more, then they might identify as a NI first type. Because I've even met some ISFPs who think that they're INTJ or INFJ, which is interesting.
I think I kind of mentioned earlier, but it's like people make SE very, very observant, and it can be. But I think as SE auxiliaries, the SE dominants tend to be hyper observant from what I've seen, whereas the SE auxiliaries, it kind of depends on what's going on, who they're around, and what they need to focus on. And they're not always the ones that are hyper observant. But like I said, it's going to depend on who you're around and comparing yourselves to. But I think with it in the middle, that SE and NI is working together more seamlessly. So you're not always like actively observing. And so people will go, well, I'm not very observant, I can't have SE. Well, not necessarily. How aware are you of how observant you are? Because there's been times in my past where, like, I think I was at camp at one point in time, and I was just kind of walking and talking to a friend. And this is going to kind of bridge in stereotypes somewhat, but it kind of proving a point, I guess. I kind of hit the stick with my leg. And the moment I hit it, I jumped over it. Like, it was just this quick automatic reflex to jump right over this thing. And people were like, whoa, how did you just do that? I didn't actually see it consciously at all. It just kind of happened and reacted. And I think that's kind of, sometimes SE is this unconscious observation. So they don't necessarily feel like they're hyper present, but if something kind of comes into their path, they're going to react to it very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, for example, when you're driving a car and you're driving alone, then you, or at least I am relatively observant of my surroundings and stuff like that. But it feels like that I can at the same time think about something. And if, on the other hand, someone's in the car and wants to talk to me, then and I'm really engaged in the conversation, then I'm still driving, but I don't even know how I got somewhere, and that feels quite frightening that you drive a car with 200 kilometers per hour in Germany, and you're talking while that, and you don't even notice consciously the things that are happening around you, but everyone is telling you that you're a brilliant driver, and that's crazy sometimes.
Or every now and then the problem is where I'll come out of whatever I was thinking and go, wait, where am I? Trying to figure out how far I got on my journey without paying attention. Well, feeling like I was paying attention.
Yeah, so for the ISTP descriptions, they're very SE heavy. Sometimes ISTPs won't identify with it because it's like, well, my SC is not that strong. Like, so they might think, oh, am I another type?
And I also think, or I have a quite sober perception of my observations, and how I perceive the world is quite unpersonal and detached. And the SE answers in surveys are they feel too exaggerated to me to choose them.
Yeah, exaggerated extroverted sensing questions. It's like, do you like skydiving or diving off a cliff? If you don't, then how can you use SC possibly?
And
Like, no.
they always use words like beautiful and qualifiers that exaggerate everything.
Yeah,
Well,
this
yeah,
is why
so the aesthetics thing that I kind of get annoyed about, sometimes people make aesthetics about SE. In my experience, that's a lot of times feelers will get more into aesthetics. Like a lot of your SCFIs, your SFPs will do a lot of that. Whereas I find the STPs are just kind of like, they're more like, is it useful? Is this practical? Like, and it's less about how does it look. Like that's the most useless way to use SE I could possibly think of. I mean, obviously there's interior design and stuff. I'm not trying to, but just from my perspective, sometimes who cares how it looks? Does it work? Can I use it?
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
for example, if someone asks, "Do you like it?" or something like that, I don't even have an answer for it. I can always say, or tell the facts and tell you what is, but I can never tell how it is for me because I don't care.
yeah, the I don't care, whatever, is kind of.
I think that distinguishes us from the FI DOMs a lot too. It's like, I don't know how I feel about this thing. Like, does it matter?
That's funny. And Mara, you mentioned a really good point about SE looking a lot like TE. So a driven STP will look like an NTJ, and that can cause maybe an ISTP who's maybe a little more driven to maybe see themselves as INTJ. Possibly, hypothesis.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that to be the case as well. I'm wondering, how would you help someone who's trying to distinguish that?
I mean, usually you try to figure out the INTJs should be a lot more structured and planned. They should actually not want that spontaneity as much. Your ISPs usually want more of the spontaneity, the freedom to do whatever, whenever. Whereas your INTJs will get a lot more into scheduling. But let me prepare for this in advance. And your NTJs in general will be a lot more, let me prepare for this in advance. And the STPs are like, no, I really don't want to prepare for this.
Yeah, so it goes down to a JP difference.
That usually, that's often the quickest way to do it, the easiest distinction to make. Because I don't feel hyper compelled to prepare for a lot of things or think about them that far in advance. Like I really don't want to think about them that far in advance because I don't feel like it's going to do me very much good. Like I was explaining this one thing earlier to Ryan, and he basically said, "Oh, that's like you hitting an NI wall." Because I every now and then kind of mock him for hitting an NI wall. Well, he was like, "That's your NI wall," and what it was is that the context was like thinking about an interview or something, or thinking about these questions that someone's going to ask me, and I go, "Yeah, I don't know how I'd answer that," and then I give up and stop thinking about it, and then just figure whenever that moment comes, I'll survive somehow. Maybe I'll come up with something. Maybe I'll blank out and just not. But I can't think of an answer, so I'm just going to give up and stop. And he was like, "That's your NI wall." I was like, "Yeah, that's interesting." Because I wish I could sit there and just think about it and eventually come up with something, but I can't. I just can't go beyond I don't know how to answer that.
Fascinating. So how far into the future do ISTPs tend to think? How far do you plan? How far?
I guess that depends if the subject is something that is fun to the ISTP. Because, for example, when I'm planning like a holiday or a hiking trip, maybe for the summer, then I will plan a lot in advance, like the things I need and buy maps and plan routes and do all the things. But that's something I choose for myself to do. You know, the trip, I choose to do that myself. And if I need or if someone wants me to plan for something I don't want to do, then I won't do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and also when I came to MBTI, I typed as INTJ2, and I still test as INTJ. And I watched a lot of Lijo's videos, and there's such you know, we are quite similar in some things, but in other things we are like the opposite of each other. Like they have a certain goal for life and things like that, and I don't even see a purpose in life. I just want to make the moment as enjoyable as possible and only prepare and plan as much as I need to maintain the possibility that tomorrow is an enjoyable day too.
That's really, really well put. And that's really consistent with all of the ISTPs that I've interviewed in the past as well. So the typical ISTP answers I hear to these questions is, so what Dominic said, when they plan, it's because there was something fun. Normally when I hear ISTP and they plan something, it normally is an event that was really fun. And they're like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to plan. This is also, I hear the ISFPs also saying that too. So it's like they'll plan, but when it's something in their interests, but it's not like a general planning mentality. And when Dominic was talking about his relationship with being in the moment and not really like having a structured goal or purpose, but trying to just kind of like live in, I don't know how you explained it, but it's a certain way that you phrased it that I've like, wow, that is very ISP. Like that's so incredibly, I don't know, it's so well put. I just want to like put it into a frame and then frame it on the wall. And I don't know, sorry. Because I think it's a good exemplar for people to understand the ISTP mentality.
Yeah, it feels to me that INTJs or the IJs in general, or the planning types, that they take a quite big detour to what actually is the goal. Because, for example, a typical INTJ thing is having a good career or something like that. And they have this goal and they plan for it and they try to achieve it very, very passionately or so. And the goal is very far ahead, but the purpose of the goal is to make you happy in the end. And why do you take all these or why do you make all this effort and make the moment or every day uncomfortable just to reach a goal that should make you happy in the end? So
Process
you can
should be fun.
yes, exactly. In German we say, der Weg ist das Ziel, the way is the goal.
Yeah, that's a big difference as well. So JE functions, FE or TE, they're both end goal oriented in some way. TE more. TE it's end goal oriented in a more noticeable way in terms of things, objects, and impersonal things. So it's more end goal with impersonal things. Whereas FE, the reason why I'd say it's end goal oriented is because it wants the end for you to be happy or for you to feel comfortable or for you to feel safe. So FE is more like relational dynamic goals, but it's still like a type of wanting some sort of end product to be good, to be happy, to be like, I don't know what you wanted it to be. Whereas TI and FI, they're more process oriented. So the process is more important. Like the process should also be enjoyable, which was really well explained by Dominic. And also, Deon, would you like to say anything about the INTJ and the ISTP? Anything?
Well, just about that planning part. For instance, if I need to pack to go somewhere, I'll leave it till the last minute, the night before. You know, I don't want to pack. It's not an enjoyable thing. So, and I think a lot of those sort of things I don't want to plan in advance at all, and I'll do them only as an absolute last minute. Learning for exams, same thing. I was awful at learning for exams. You even lead yourself to believe that you'll get to that tonight and you'll squeeze it in between this and that hour. And me not being a night person, in the end result didn't look good. Just exams never went well. But yes, planning for enjoyable things, yes, sure. But as you guys were talking, I was also pondering the following, that since the primary motive for me is process and understanding, there would be a plan, but the plan would fall under the process versus the process falling into the plan. In other words, my plans will always get adjusted and extended as required by the process versus having to fit into a schedule. So yes, so deadlines are my absolute worst thing ever.
Yeah.
I hate working to a deadline, and I know I can't almost.
Very interesting, Deon. There's a post that Heidi Pri tweeted on Twitter, and it was about how to distinguish an ISFP from an INFJ, which I think is relevant to distinguishing an ISTP from an INTJ. And she was talking about one way to tell the difference between an ISP and an INJ is how they react when their plan is thrown off. With ISPs, because they weren't really holding that plan so tightly to begin with, if it takes like a last minute, you're still introverts, so you're gonna hate like last minute. I don't know. So like you can still hate like detours, but it's almost like deviations from a set in stone plan is okay because you never had a set in stone plan to begin with. Whereas for the INJs might feel a bit of whiplash, backlash, and less of a willingness to deviate because it's almost like they have to adjust their entire vision. They have to adjust their entire direction. They're like, it's almost like they were all building up for this one thing, and then now that one thing's not going to like pan out, and then now there's this reluctance to adjust and adapt. So ISPs, they have SE, extroverted sensing, as their auxiliary function. So that's going to give them a slight more ease with adaptation than an INJ would have on a general whole. So yeah, any other differentiations you guys see that you guys want to mention?
Yeah, the INTJs are going to need to plan it more. Because I can kind of contrast that with Ryan, even though he's an ISTJ, where you have a similar dynamic where I'm like, let's just do the thing. Let's just do the thing. We don't need to think that much about it. Like we basically thought about it. We thought about it enough to do the thing. And he's like, no, we still have to think about the thing. But why? But why do we have?
Or if there's some task to be achieved, the NI-DOM, as in the INTJ, is going to be pondering and trying to bring in all these relations. What if this? How could we do that? And the ISTP is just not going to be doing that. They're going to be, you don't need to be thinking all those things. Let's just do it.
And I wants to forecast a lot. Let me figure out where this is going to go before I bother to do it.
Almost a fear of taking action because you haven't mentally processed all the variations of that thing. Whereas the ISTP is quite happy to take that risk and just, if we know one path that'll work, that'll work.
Yeah. So there's this quote from One Punch Man, the anime, where he basically says, I'll leave tomorrow's problems for tomorrow's me.
Yeah.
Just, that's not right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I will actually often do that. I will, if I'm needing to fix something, I'm happy enough to do a half fix because it serves the purpose for now.
Mm-hmm.
The better fix for later, planning, can come later.
Yeah. So having that SE higher up will make you guys more okay with just doing it and doing a half fix for now, and then maybe like later revising it instead of a full solution right away, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like like what Mara was saying, like the most obvious difference between ISTPs and INTJs is that JP difference. But
so the INTJ with the inferior extroverted sensing, that should be a stark contrast.
Yeah.
I do think there's a lot of stereotypes. I think there have been so many mistypes with the INTJ that distinction has been muddled. But when it comes right down to it, the INTJ should not be comfortable with a lot of adapting. They shouldn't be. And you should get more of that, I don't know, saying it in a really negative way, stick in the mud type thing. Even though I'm not trying to, but you should have that problem where we don't want to adapt on the fly. We just don't.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of your more adaptable INTJs, either they're older or they're ENTJs.
Agreed.
I remember that Michael, the INTJ, said in one of your videos that he almost plans to be spontaneous and or flexible or something like that. And I really related to that statement, but I guess that it is a good example that the same words can mean something totally different, because he plans to be spontaneous, to do something else, something to deviate from his end goal or something like that. And I plan to be or to maintain the possibility to be flexible. I want to make sure that I'm not pushed into one side or something like that, or I want to be able to, independent or something like that. If it makes sense.
Yeah.
So like with the vacation example, planning a vacation, I think a lot of times what that is I'll plan the vacation because I'm not an SE dominant. So I'm not very good at just going out there and finding all the things to do. So what I'm going to do is come up with a list of things to do so that I have options when I get there, because I'm not very good at just finding those options. So I'm going to have my list of things I can access or reference when I'm out there of what do I want to do right now. But I don't necessarily want to make an itinerary for it. I don't want to structure it. I just want to have options. I can go, I feel like doing this right now. And so go out and do that now. So I'm going to plan my vacation from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of like the planning for spontaneity in a sense.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
So from
I guess it's just to prevent necessities, so that you don't have to do something, so that you still have to maintain the choice, that you can choose whether to do this or that, and not just go somewhere and because you haven't planned enough, you have to do one thing and you don't like it.
Yeah, waste your vacation away. Who wants to do that?
Yeah. So it's the classic perceiver who wants to keep their options open. So it's like, I want to plan, so then my options are open when it comes to be. Great points. Any others before we end the panel? Like any other differences you guys see between ISTPs and INTJs and INTPs?
I mean, obviously the INTJs are more abstract and they just kind of pull things, whereas your SE and Is usually have everything based on observation of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So usually NI will come up in support of that SE observation.
Someone told me that he thought that INTJs were the most I don't give a fuck about people type, and about their opinions. And I thought that to be wrong, that more applies to IPs in general, because the IJ's first deciding function is extroverted, so they take in the reasons of other people. So INTJs have for example, goals that are socially accepted, but they take a different or a more efficient and a more efficient way that doesn't consider the feelings part so much, so that other people perceive it as I don't give a fuck, but they still take in the common goals like everyone has, like having a good career or something like that. And the IPs on the other side, they don't even care about the goal, you know?
Wonderful discussion, ISTPs. Brilliant distinctions you've all drawn between the different types, like between ISTPs and their most common mistypes, the INTP and the INTJ. I think this is a good video for people trying to distinguish if they're friend or if they are an ISTP. So this is a really helpful guide. So thank you for all of the knowledge, the wisdom, the insight, the thoughtfulness you all put into answering the questions I had for you.
Thanks, Joyce.
Yeah, there's always some sort of camaraderie when I spend time with people who use the same functions as me. So thank you for being in my function group. Yeah, ISTPs tend to be like, they're so cool. wait. Yes. So yeah, it was really nice, Deon, seeing your model airplanes and seeing it, like you were showing us that piece that you had that you made and that you crafted. Yeah, and that was so awesome. Yeah, showing some ISTP craftsmanship to the viewers. Yeah, that was so fascinating to see. Yeah, and also to the viewers, this panel is a representation that not all ISTPs are craftsmen, although there are some that are. Most of them aren't. To figure out someone's type, it's to look beyond the behavior and to look at the why they're doing things, the cognitive reasoning for why they're doing things, because type is in how your cognition is functioning, hence the word cognitive function. So that's how you figure out someone's type. Yeah, and so thank you for that. And Mara, thank you for your website. When I came across it, I was surprised in the best way possible, because it's very accurate and it's a free resource for people, so they can go on and they can read articles on the Jungian functions and have all of this amazing information for free. I like that freedom of information, that any layperson can learn about the functions, and that creates more awareness of type. And your articles are really bang on. You do a good job. And I like reading them. Yeah, I go on your Facebook page and I always like heart all your new articles that I see. And I'm like, yeah, that's Mara and Ryan. Yeah, it's to show support. Yeah, so it just shows you how much I heart your work. It's true. All right. And yeah, Dominic, it's nice to talk to you about music. Thank you for showing me your playlists. And even though you're partially uncomfortable being on camera and you don't want to be, you're still on because I asked you. That means a lot to me. I noticed this trend with ISTPs when I ask them to be on panels. The first time, sometimes like they'll hesitate for a long time. Mara took 2 weeks to see if she wanted to be a part of the first panel I asked her to be a part of, but then she eventually said yes, and that was like amazing. Now we're a family. Look at what your decision made. You're like, oh god, Joyce. Yeah. So yeah, it was nice meeting you, Dominic, and having chats with you. And your PowerPoints, your PowerPoints telling people to be more accurate with their thought is really amazing. You teach us to organize our thinking and our ideas and our thoughts. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope this helped to distinguish why ISTPs tend to mistype as INTPs and INTJs and how to tell the difference. And I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.